Good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to be standing here in front of you. The theme that I have chosen this afternoon to talk about is a story about a storyteller. Now, very often I meet people who look at me and then they are not sure where they have seen me before. And they tell me, I think I've seen you somewhere. Were you a judge on a dance show on television? Or were you part of a quiz show somewhere else, etc.? And I tell them no, but then they look at me and ask me, what do you do? It's at this point that I know the long and short of this problem called the Gettier Problem. Now, what is that? Look at that. Okay, now the Gettier Problem is a problem that arises in philosophy, in mathematics, and in logic. So you assume, you see something and you assume it's the truth. It is the truth, but the assumption is for all the wrong reasons. So if you look at that, there's this chappie walking there. He sees a rock and he thinks it's a sheep. He gets close and then he realizes that it is a rock, it isn't a sheep. But then a sheep pops up from behind. So was he right in assuming that rock was a sheep, or was that a sheep in the first place? So that is a Gettier problem, which is what I face all the time when people look at me and ask me, I think I know you, but I don't know you why, and they think they know me for all the wrong reasons. So at that point is when I think that maybe I should make up a story and tell them something that they would like to hear. So tell them maybe I'm a wrestler, maybe I'm an astronaut, maybe I'm a veterinary doctor, whatever. But in the last minute, I lose my nerve and I say, I do nothing. At that point, there is this big thought bubble that is growing around their head, which is, no, she's lying. She can't be doing nothing. What does she really do? Now, you must wonder, why is it that I can't just turn around and tell them that I'm a writer? The reason being that a writer to me seems someone who's very lofty and very distanced from what I actually do, which is tell stories. I'm a storyteller. Now, I have thought about this title called a storyteller several times and asked myself, who or what is a storyteller? A storyteller is someone who does more than just narrate stories. A storyteller is someone who begins with an idea, and into that mixture of thoughts goes a lot of things. There is history, there is geography, there is mathematics, there is physics, there is chemistry, and if you're an atheist, you can call it nature, and if you're a believer, you can call it God. All of this goes into what a storyteller does. And then there is something else that happens perhaps only in the world of literature. There is something called a pause. Now, a pause is when the subconscious mind, which has been gathering all this facts and information, memories and observations, all of it goes into a fire, and it is lit under a crucible called the imagination. And this is what creates stories. This is a very, very famous quote by Nabokov, the author of Lolita, for those of you who don't know who he is. It says basically that, the proper quote is there, but if you don't want to read it, it says that the first story was not born when a boy came out of a valley screaming, wolf, wolf, and there was a wolf behind him. The first story was born when a boy came out of a valley screaming, wolf, wolf, and there was no wolf behind him. So you see, that is where a story begins. There is imagination, there is observation, and there is reality. So what I'm going to do this afternoon as I stand here before you is to take you through a few instances of how, through my own life, anecdotal examples of how stories are born or how my stories were born. Now, serendipity is something that happens in each one of our lives. It happens to us many a time. What a storyteller does is to be able to identify serendipity and make that into fodder for imagination, make that into substance for a story. I come from a very small village in Kerala. It's called Mundakottakurushi. It is so tiny that nobody knows anything about it. In fact, there is nothing that happens there. If you see that, that's the extent of the village as of now. I'm not talking about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So the village is so tiny. Like I was saying, no Mahatma has been, has ever lived there or was born there. There is no form of, handicrafts or craft forms that originate from there, which make people go looking for it. Nothing of significance happens there to anybody except, the natural course of life and death. But what Mundakottakurushi has, and I'm very proud of that, is that it has a wicked sense of humor and irony. We don't have an ATM, we don't have a movie theater, but we have a cricket club which is called MCC, which is a joke on the Marylebone Cricket Club, and it is Mundakottakurushi Cricket Club. We have something like 5 shops like what you see there, but we still call ourselves the city. In 1984, when the first bus began plying between the nearest town, Shornur, and Mundakottakurushi, when the bus came, they were still designating bus stands and deciding what to call it. So they came to this point where there were 4 shops. The conductor stopped and they looked around and they said, let's call this Mundakottakurushi city. And so it became Mundakottakurushi city. The politics in this village is very interesting. In the 1950s, it was a stronghold for communist activity, and so they started calling this village also Moscow. But now in recent times, you have a strong presence of Congress, you have a strong presence of the BJP, you have the Muslim League, and you have the Communist Party, because of which every election time is like a game of Russian roulette. You don't know who's going to win and by what margin. My family goes back there by 460 years at least. And my parents, when they retired from service, moved back to the village. That was our ancestral village. In true South Indian tradition, my parents are related. And so they decided to go back. And once they were there, it took them after 6 years, they still couldn't break into this community. A village is so tight. Everywhere we like to believe of villages as this bucolic, idyllic places, but they can be the most closed community, most sanctimonious kind of people. So after about 6 years, my parents were sick and tired of it, and they said they were going to leave. And they decided they were going to sell the property. I was heartbroken because I've always felt this great connection to this place. So I thought I was going to chronicle this village for my son. So at a point in life when he would turn around and ask me, where did we come from? I would just give him this book and say, here, this is our history. I started writing. 1 chapter down, I suddenly stopped and I said, what am I doing chronicling a village? This is the material for my first novel. This is what I'm going to be writing about, how little villages are simply a microcosm of the entire universe that we live in. Everything that you can see in the world around you, you can see in a little village. We just don't want to be, we are in denial most of the time, not wanting to accept it. And so my first novel, The Better Man, was born. I published my first 2 novels. I had a certain element of fame and celebrity-dom, etc. I was being constantly invited for dinner parties where I would be lionized. I was invited for speaking engagements. I was invited for various kinds of things. I was going on world tours for my books and stuff like that. And at some point in my life, I took a step back and asked myself, is this artistic success? All this fame, whatever, being lionized, giving out interviews, whatever awards, whatever you win, is this truly a measure of artistic success? Or is artistic success something that an artist himself or herself understands, when you know that you've raised the bar for yourself, you've pushed yourself out of your comfort zone, and that you have made a certain impact, not just on the world around you, but within yourself. So this was a question that was troubling me. It was a huge kind of thing that sat on my head all the time. I was re-examining my work and asking myself, what am I doing? Am I going to play to the gallery and just keep writing the same kind of things that have got me success? Or am I going to push the barrier higher? Okay. So then I remembered something very significant that had happened in my life. I was working in advertising, and one day I walk into work, and it was a little agency, so steps go up and so on. I climb up the steps and go there, and in the reception is a Kathakali dancer. For those of you who haven't seen what a Kathakali dancer is, look at the costume on the right, the one with the crown. There he is, standing in full costume in the middle of the reception. So the reception must be not even as large as the dais that I'm standing on. He's standing there and he's doing mudras, he's doing this and everything. And there, the rest of my colleagues are standing there, and there were sniggers, there were giggles, because to them he was just a kind of strange figure of ridicule who had appeared one morning in the office reception. And then I saw him, hold his costume like this, go down the stairs. They put him up into the back of a pickup truck and they took him away. I went back into the office and I said, what was going on? So they said, so by the way, I live in Bangalore. So they said he was being brought here as a gimmick, as a living, walking, talking rate card for an upcountry publication. Now, for those of you who don't know what a rate card is, it is something that publications, periodicals, newspapers, we are talking pre-internet period, would hand out to various advertising agencies, saying that if you were to do a quarter-page advertisement, this is what it'll cost you in black and white, this is what it'll cost you in color, etc. So there are different kinds of rates. So since there were so many publications in those days, they needed to do something gimmicky to catch the attention of the media planner in the advertising agency. And this man, who had probably put in 9 years of work, because before you actually get onto a stage, you have to go through a 9-year intense routine of learning, was suddenly reduced to being a prop. And you see this all the time. You see a Kathakali dancer being used as a prop in a detergent commercial. Sometimes he's used as a background dancer in a movie song. Sometimes you see 4 or 5 of them standing there and raising their legs like chorus dancers. And somewhere something in me died at that thought, that here is a person who has put in so much. And I wouldn't blame him, because he has absolutely no place to stand there and to perform his art, because fewer and fewer people are watching Kathakali. And he has to take what he has to. But I was thinking about the world we live in, which reduces art to nothing. And so one of the basic tenets of Kathakali, for instance, is that a minute on the stage demands 100 hours of practice. And generally, a Kathakali performance can stretch as long as 5 hours. So just imagine the amount of work he would have had to put in, and he has absolutely no opportunity to perform. At that point, I knew that I wanted to write a book exploring the concept of artistic success. I have no answers. I had no answers. I still don't have a clear-cut answer, but at least I was able to arrive at a certain understanding that for me, it might be different for every other artist in the world, but for me, artistic success is basically about pushing the barrier, about taking it to the next level, to be able to tell myself at the end of it all that this was worth it. Because if you look at it, what is the meaning or significance of art in everyday life? If you look at it, it's just a piece of art that you hang on a wall. It's probably a piece of music that you listen to when you're climbing, I mean, when you're in an elevator or in your dentist reception area. It is probably a book you read and then leave behind and never look at again. But somebody somewhere has been sitting and working on it and toiling endlessly on it. And for what joy, as some other speakers have said before. And yesterday I was having dinner with my publisher, and she was telling me about a cricketer who's writing his biography. And once the economics of it was explained to him, he turned around and said, why do writers write if there's no money in it? Writers write because we can't help ourselves. We have to write. So every artist creates because they can't help it. They need to create. So yes, there is serendipity, there is self-examination, but there is one other thing that as a storyteller, I need to be able to create my stories. I cannot live within this ivory tower of my own existential angst and, you know, tell myself this is what I'm going to be writing about. So sometimes it happens and then I should know when to do it. So 21st of September 2013, I was working, and then there was a news alert saying that there was this shooting that happened in the Westgate Mall in Nairobi. Friends of mine, very close friends of mine, live in Nairobi, and every Saturday morning they would go to the mall, and I was petrified. I was wondering what happened. Then I managed to get through to them and realized they were safe. I went back to my writing. But later in the day, as the news alerts were kind of coming in, I realized that there was something else there, that it had been a shootout by an Islamic group, and they had segregated the group into two sets of audiences. I mean, two sets of people. They said the Muslims and the non-Muslims. The Muslims were allowed to go. They turned around and they apparently asked everybody to make sure that they were Muslims. One of the things that they did was to ask them the name of the Prophet's mother. Now, I have been to several schools here in India, and one of the things that I realize all the time is that I ask the children there, tell me what is the name of the monkey god. Children pipe up and say Hanuman. What was Rama's wife called? Sita comes up immediately. I turn around and ask them, what was Jesus' mother called? Mary. How did Jesus die? He was nailed on a cross. Then I asked them, what is the name of the Prophet's mother? Blank. Absolute silence. And at that point, there was this writer in me again, the storyteller in me, who said, there is a lacuna that needs to be filled, and I am going to try and fill it. And the thing was, the Quran has always been seen as a book that people don't want to talk about. Now, I'm not an expert on Islamic studies, but I do, like everybody else, like reading parables. And you do see parables in all books. So I thought what I would do was look at the Islamic lore and work out a book which would allow children and people, several of us here in this room who do not know anything about what are the contents of the Quran, understand some things, some elements, so that we know that there is absolutely nothing that preaches violence and hatred in the Quran. Just like any other tenet of any other religion, whether it is Judaism or Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, whatever, the Quran too is a book that preaches peace and love. And so was born my children's book called Muezza and Baby Jan, Stories from the Quran. At the end of it all, when I look back and I ask myself, why do I write? I just have one reason why I write: to lead from ignorance to the beginnings of knowledge, from prejudice to a better understanding, and to reaffirm in these times wreaked with discrimination and terror that there is still hope, that we need to be as much humane as we are human. Nothing else matters, nothing else is of consequence. Thank you.